Oyez! 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 My proclamation today is to welcome our friends from Sandwich, Massachusetts to visit our wonderful 16th century Guildhall here in Sandwich. Please join me on a tour of our 16th century Guildhall, where we go from modern times right back to 1579. So please sit back and enjoy the video, and welcome to our wonderful town of Sandwich in Kent. God save the Queen!
Welcome to the Guildhall and welcome to Sandwich. My name's Kevin, I'm the town sergeant and town crier of our goodly town of Sandwich, and I'm here to take you on a virtual tour of the Guildhall. We're in the new part of the building that was built in about 1973 with money from our toll bridge fund, and we're going to be looking at the building today from 1973 through to 1912, right through to the old part of the building, which is 1579. But I always like to start the tour with this rather lovely clock behind me. Now this is called a Parliament clock, and that's because in 1797 there was an Act of Parliament passed whereby you were taxed on clocks and watches in your house. It was a very unsuccessful tax, and it only lasted a year, and it was to fund the Napoleonic Wars. But during that time a number of these very simple wooden case clocks were made to put in public places so people could try and tell the time. Very simple mechanism, just a heavy lead weight pulls down on the mechanism to give you the mechanism that works the clock. As I say, it's about 200 years old, and it loses about 2 minutes a week. I'm 48 years old and I lose about half a day a week, so it's doing an awful lot better than I am. But these do turn up on some of our UK shows like Antiques Roadshow and things like that. So you can speak with gusto now if you should see a Parliament clock turn up on an antique show in the USA. Our Parliament clock. So we've moved along the landing a little bit. I'm still in the newer part of the building. So look at this rather lovely, very long picture that runs along the landing. This was painted in 1977 by a local artist and school teacher called Kate Gerber. It's just a nice example of the architecture in our town. It's said to be one of the longest continuous rows of timber-framed houses still in existence in the country. The interesting thing is that despite the fact that the estate's for 300–400 years old, all the shops and houses look very similar to how they did when they were originally built. You can't put double glazing in, you can't change the colours. So everything has to go through very much procedure with the local council before you can do anything to the building. Just a lovely example of the architecture in our town. But if we look above that, you can see our rogues gallery, you can see the pictures of all our mayors. Now, we've used our mayors from 1974, just behind me, right round to the current times. And the reason we've done that is because in 1974, England had a local government changeover. The town of Sandwich lost all its powers as an independent town and joined into a district with other towns of Dover, Deal and the surrounding villages. So we chose to pick up our mayors from 1974. And these mayors along the top here are all the ones that have been in office since 1974. You can find out more about them, I expect, on our website or by contacting our archivists. But all these mayors have served from 1974 right up until the current time. So we had a look at our mayors, which are on the wall behind where I'm looking now. But these are more important people. These are the town sergeants, which are my predecessors. And we go right back to a gentleman here called Charles Lee, dating from 1890. We have a continuous run of town sergeants right along here and on the wall just behind me, dating up to me, to current times in fact. It's interesting to note that since 1974 there have been 17 mayors of Sandwich, but since 1890 there have only been 6 town sergeants. That's interesting to note that the people of Sandwich must trust their town sergeants a little bit more than they trust their mayors, I think. It's an interesting role being town sergeant. It is a full-time position. It has always been a full-time position. We're mayor's chauffeurs, mayor's attendants, and we're very lucky to be caretakers for this wonderful 16th century building as well. So we've moved through now to the first of our ancient rooms to the Guildhall. This room dates from 1912. It's called the jury room, or the grand jury room. It's a lovely historic room and was the original extension to the 16th century Guildhall. And behind me, we can see where it's extended from. This is a picture dating from 1906, painted by a local artist called Maurice Page. Up here we'll see the yellow facaded building which was knocked down in about 1912 And this is the room we're in now. The grand jury room was built here, the original extension. This is a picture of the cattle market, as was. We think the cattle market finished in about 1977, but this is now the Guildhall forecourt outside, and some also public car parking at the rear. And it shows a vista right up through the Guildhall forecourt to still existing shops and pubs at the top of the picture. It's just a lovely example of what the cattle market would have looked like in Sandwich, which unfortunately, as I said, finished in about 1977. So as we're in the seat of Sandwich Town Council, it's nice to talk about our mayors. We're still in the jury room, and behind me you'll see the picture of a lovely mayor, a guy called Bill Chesterfield. Still with us today, aged in his mid-90s. He was in fact the last borough mayor of Sandwich from 1972 to 1974, and he was also a town mayor of Sandwich when we went down to a town council in 1985 to 1987. You'll see he's wearing a black robe and black ribbons on his chains. There's a story behind this. The Mayor of Sandwich has worn black robes since 1457. In 1457, 4,000 men from the town of Honfleur rowed across the channel and invaded the town of Sandwich on a Sunday afternoon, where the 963 people were sitting watching telly, or whatever they did in 1457 on a Sunday afternoon. The Frenchmen got off the boats and invaded the town, and the battle raged through days and nights. And we called upon our friends from Deal and the villages surrounding to give us some support, and eventually we did manage to repel the invaders. Unfortunately, the mayor of the day, a guy called John Drury, died in action, and the black robes that the mayor wears today are to commemorate the death of John Drury. And every occasion, except on one occasion, the Mayor of Sandwich has always worn black robes since 1457. So why is the gentleman on my right wearing red robes? Well, that's because he's a baron of the Cinque Ports. I have to tell you that the mayors of Sandwich and the mayors of all the Cinque Ports get what are called honours at court. They actually get to take part in a coronation. Of course, the last coronation was in 1953. This guy was called Henry Birch, and he got to take part in the coronation. The Cinque Port mayors used to hold a magnificent golden canopy over the monarch as they went up to get crowned, but that dwindled, and they now hold little pennants celebrating different parts of the Commonwealth. So the mayors still get to take part in the coronation if they're Cinque Port mayors. And they're very excited about this now because, of course, the Queen is ageing, and sooner or later there will be a coronation. So, black robes for the Mayor of Sandwich and red robes for barons of the Cinque Ports. So the Cinque Port mayors used to get something called honours at court. And as we've moved into the Mayor's Parlour now, which is our first room that dates from 1579, I'll tell you a little bit about this item behind me, which is to do with the honours at court. This is a golden canopy that was carried over George III in his coronation in 1761. And it would have been carried on a number of poles by all the Cinque Port mayors. It was presented to the town in 1961 by Molly Sayer, who was a direct descendant of the mayor that carried it at the time, Valentine Sayer. So it's a beautiful artefact. We're very privileged to have it in Sandwich, and it's all gold and silver thread, and I'm told it weighs a great deal when it's on the poles. This is just a portion of it, but it's a magnificent item to be having the Mayor's Parlour here, our coronation canopy. So we've moved around the Mayor's Parlour a little bit, and I thought I'd show you this wonderful item here, the Mayor's Blackthorn Wand, straight and true. Actually, this one's not too bad. Now, every year I go to a local village, about 2 or 3 miles away, called Worth, and I go to a windbreak down there, and I cut them out a stout staff of blackthorn. I bring it back here, I rub it down, and I paint it black for him. And then I present it to him at mayor making ceremony. Now, I present him with this blackthorn wand, and he gives me a crown, which is an old English coin. It's getting harder to get crowns, so they actually give me a modern £5 coin now, and that is my payment for the year's work ahead to be with the mayor. Very old tradition. So I'm very pleased because I give him a bent stick and he gives me a £5 coin. Seems like a good deal to me. So we've moved a little bit further around the Mayor's Parlour. There's so many lovely things in here we could show you, but we've moved around to our town charter, dating from Charles I. Now this is a beautiful item. It's all handwritten, as you can see, Latin on vellum. It's very interesting because I'm told that the pictures, if you like, around the outside of all the wording are actually printed, yet the wording itself is all handwritten, as are the lines across, all drawn by hand. And if you could see as closely as I can, the margins are slightly skewed and the lines go slightly over the edge of the margins and things like that. So it's got this lovely handmade feel to it. As I say, it dates from the time of Charles I, and it really is a beautiful thing. The town charter gave the powers from the king to the local towns. And interestingly enough, Sandwich was chartered originally in 1226. That's when the first mayor of Sandwich was. So a beautiful artefact, our town charter. So the final thing we're going to look at in the mayor's parlour is this rather splendid list of all the known mayors of Sandwich. It may not seem like very much, but to historians and people like that who think that they may have had people who were mayors of Sandwich, it's a great thing to be able to look at. The first mayor of Sandwich is a guy called Helias de Kingston in 1226, but my favourite is the second one from 1227, who was simply called Peter the Baker, which I think is fantastic. There's a number of boards, as you can see behind me, and the one on my left flips around as well, to give the list of all the known mayors. And my latest mayor, the one that's been in office for about 3 weeks when this video was made, is our councillor Paul Gordon Graham. So it's right up to date with all the known mayors of Sandwich. It's a great artefact, and we are the only town that I'm aware of that has a list of known mayors going back as far as 1226. So we're finished in the mayor's parlour now, and we're going to go through to the council chamber. So we've moved through now from the mayor's parlour to the council chamber, as is where the seat of Sandwich Town Council is. Sandwich Town Councillors sit in 15 chairs, and the mayor, the 16th councillor, sits in the big chair just behind me. And I'm also the mace bearer for the town, part of my duties as town sergeant, and we'll look at our smaller maces first. Now, these have got a verbal provenance on them only of 1435, which is really interesting. Now, if they do date from 1435, the larger of the small maces, which is this one here, may well have been handled by Queen Elizabeth I when she visited the town in 1571. We know that Queen Elizabeth I visited the town at around that time, and the mayor at the time would have surrendered his authority in the town by kneeling before her and handing her this mace. So it's very exciting that I have in my hand a mace that may have been handled by Queen Elizabeth I. Therefore, we know it's a very precious thing to the town of Sandwich. Should be treated with the greatest respect, I'm sure you'll agree. That's our maces from 1435. You will also see this very large mace here, and this is the one that we use regularly. This dates from 1763, George III. It's of a good weight. All the maces are made of silver gilt, which means they're solid silver with a gilding on them. And it's carried on my right shoulder thusly. And as I was in procession, as I would be dressed thus, the mayor should be directly behind me. Not the town clerk, not the rector, not the Lord Warden of the Singports, nobody like that. I should always, when I'm processing, walk along, glance behind me, and I should see the mayor. If he's not there, I have to go back and find him. This is our large town mace in regular use, 1763. And further along, we'll see what is possibly the oldest artefact in the Guildhall. Now this is our moot horn, which I believe comes from the term moot, Saxon French, meaning meeting. Now this would have been blown before town crying, before the bellman, to get the men of the town, I'm afraid, ladies, to a prominent public place to hear the news of the day. It's rather a magnificent thing, as I say. It dates from about the 1300s, and I'm not very good at getting a note out of it, but I will try for you. Bear with me. Our moot horn. Not great, I'm sure you'll agree, but that is our moot horn, the oldest artefact in the Guildhall. And behind all these magnificent things, you will see these panels. You may not have a very good picture of them because of the glare on them, but they show Catherine of Braganza's visit to the town in 1672. And what you may not be able to see are these wonderful carriages here, but you come along to this one, which is Catherine of Braganza sitting in her carriage, surrounded by all the gentlemen in their black robes, which were the Sandwich Town Councillors, and the mayor's there greeting her. Now, she was supposed to get out of her carriage there and take some food and wine with the mayor of Sandwich, but it said that she didn't drink wine and she didn't want to get out of her carriage to eat because she had this magnificent dress on. But she was actually convinced to take, in the end, a little food and a little wine in her carriage while the mayor stood outside. So we like to think that not only did the town of Sandwich invent the sandwich, but we also invented the world's first drive-through restaurant. So we've nearly completed our brief tour of the Guildhall here, but we come into our final room, which is the ancient courtroom, probably the best room. It was actually created in 1579, a copy of the original courthouse, which probably stood behind St Peter's Church, just a couple of hundred yards away. And it was last used as magistrates' court in 1987. I was actually a spotty youth of 21 years old in 1987, working for the local authority, Trading Standards Department, and I actually brought cases through this courthouse 2 weeks before it was shut down. So I'm very privileged to have used this building as a courthouse. And we'll look at the layout of the building. Behind me you'll see what was originally the judge's chair and later of course the magistrate's chair. And I'm standing in the area that the solicitors would have been in. You could just imagine people standing here twanging their braces and saying "Malud" a lot. Just to the left a shot here, this is the witness boxes. So this is where the witnesses would have given their evidence from. And we move across to the right of shot here and we have the accused box. Now this is where the villains would have been, and people would have been everything from minor crimes of stealing and driving offences later on, and people would have been sentenced to death in here as well. We also have where the camera's standing. You're standing in the area where the crowds would have been. This is where the baying masses, this is where the public would have been, and they would have probably been quite raucous at times, particularly in the Middle Ages. They would have been quite raucous about all the cases that were going through. And just up to my left, we also have the jury box. Now the jury box was interesting because it was used to concertina and fold back into the walls, and these balustrades and railings would lift clear. And this was an area that was then used where the town guilds would have met, the tailors, the leatherers, all the important businesses in the town, the tanners, would have come here to meet and discuss the business of the day, and that's where you get the expression Guildhall from. So we're focusing now on this magnificent stained glass window in the ancient courtroom. Noise you can hear is actually a French market going on outside, which is providing a nice backdrop to this spectacular window. You'll see Queen Elizabeth I here receiving the larger of the small maces which we looked at earlier from the Mayor of the day. Now it's interesting to note that the Mayor there is wearing a red robe, and I did mention before that on one occasion he did wear a red robe. And it's said that Queen Elizabeth I didn't want to sit down to eat with a gentleman dressed in a black frock. So on this one occasion, I'm told by the local historians that we borrowed a robe from the village of East Street, just a couple of miles up the road, and borrowed their robe. This window actually only went in 1906, but it is a magnificent example of some of the stained glass which is in the Guildhall. And in the background, you will see that everybody looks a bit like Sir Walter Raleigh, don't they? But most importantly, we'll finish this little tour talking about the spikes, the pikes, the halberds in the background of the stained glass window. So as we come to the end of our tour in the courtroom here, you'll see behind me Queen Elizabeth I's coat of arms, those figures standing behind me. I know it looks a bit like an armadillo, but that's actually Queen Elizabeth I's dragon. And that of course is a lion, and they're framing me nicely as we talk about the last fun thing in the courtroom. And that's these halberds which I was talking about a little while ago. And there's 4 of them hanging from the ceiling. They tell me 2 of them are replicas and 2 of them are original, but they won't tell me which are which because I've got an eBay account. However, they're a great weapon. You'll notice on the business end there's a spike that sticks out. Now that's for running through your villain with. But don't worry, if he should break it off and run away, you spin it round and you'll see a hook on the other side, and you can get that right into his right shoulder. Now if that snaps off, don't fret, because there's an axe head on the other side, and you can slam that down and get that into his left shoulder. Should the whole head break off, don't worry. On the other end, there's a spike which you can run him through with again. Should he still manage to twist away and get away from you, don't you worry, because I've had one of these down for cleaning, and I can tell you that that shaft is heavy enough to club the bugger to death with. So that really brings us to the end of our little mini tour of the Guildhall. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to my friends here in Sandwich, Massachusetts about the Guildhall and about the history that we've got in the town. I do hope you'll have an opportunity sometime in the future to come and visit the Guildhall, come and visit myself and all the staff here at the Guildhall, and have a proper personal tour yourselves. Thank you very much indeed for your time, and I do hope that you enjoy everything we told you about the Guildhall and Sandwich itself. Thank you very much indeed.